I'll get yours soon. good as a 20-year-old. Anyway, it's good.
20-year-old, what's that?
Huh?
20-year-old, what's that?
Okay. Good morning, everyone. So we are going to continue with Russia today. And we're going to continue with Russia this morning and see how far we can get. Hopefully, I don't know. We'll see. So last week we were ending the 19th century, and we talked about the assassination of Tsar Alexander II and the pogroms that happened starting with that assassination. And it became very difficult, life became very difficult for Jews in Russia after 1881. And so between 1880 and 1920, Jews fled Russia. And many came to the United States, and many went to other places as well. As we talked about last week at the very end of class, so that was the time, as you well know, that so many Jews passed through Ellis Island. And what stopped that immigration was called the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act of 1924. And the United States government severely limited how many Jews could come over. They kind of disguised it as a limit to Jews who were coming over. They kind of disguised it for people who were coming over from the Southeast Asia region. But it was primarily directed against Jewish immigration. So why would the United States want to stifle Jewish immigration? They were anti-Semitic. And also, they didn't want to have such an influx of poor people coming into the United States. And that, coupled with the intrinsic anti-Semitism, caused them to pass this act in Congress, and it severely limited how many Jews could come here fleeing the pogroms. Now, at the same time, we also know that there was a huge, not like to the United States, but there was also a very large movement towards Israel in successive aliyot, the aliyot, the first aliyah, the second aliyah, the third, okay. And these were Jews who were leaving to build up their homeland. Because remember, Zionism at this time was starting to catch on in a big way. And there are two movements that we should talk about. So starting in 1882, there were a number of Jews who joined what was called the Bilu movement. Bilu. Now that's a name that you should be familiar with, at least understand, okay, I've heard this term before. And the Bilu movement was an acronym for Beit Yaakov Lechu V'Nelcha. House of Jacob, let us go up. House of Jacob, let us go up. And it was called the Bilu movement, and it was a social Zionist movement because these were Jews who wanted to go build up the land of, at that time, Palestine, and create cooperatives. They were coming. Remember, the Soviet Union had not undergone its revolution yet. That's not going to happen until 1917. But these were Jews who wanted to go build up the land of Palestine as a homeland. And eventually, over the course of time, the Bilu movement kind of faded out. The organizational skills weren't there. And so the organization eventually petered out and died. And many of the members went to a different organization called the Hovevei Tzion, the Lovers of Zion. And so these were the two biggest early movements for the Aliyot of Russian Jews. Okay, and that started in 1882. 1917, just before 1917, which is a very big year, that's the Russian Revolution, there's 300,000 Zionists in Russia. We talked about this last week at the end. There were 33,000 members of the Bund, which was a secular movement, kind of like a union to fight for the rights of Jewish workers. And the purpose of the Bund was to unite all Jewish workers into a united socialist party. It ended up dissolving into communism in 1921. So we then have the Russian Revolution. In 1917, Nicholas II, not Nicholas I, who conscripted the boys into the army, Nicholas II and Alexandra abdicated the throne. They were taken off to Yekaterinburg and executed. And then began the Russian Civil War for the next 7 to 8 years. And the Russian Civil War was fought between the Red Army and the White Army. Does anyone have any idea what those were? Okay, so the White Army were loyal to the Tsar and the monarchy. The Red Army were basically the Bolsheviks, who were fighting for the people against the monarchy and against the Tsar. And the Cossacks were affiliated with the White Army, those who were loyal to the Tsar. Nicholas II was not friendly to Jews. And Russia, under his rule, was not friendly to Jews. On the other hand, Lenin, who becomes the spokesperson for the other side, has a very different opinion. Lenin was sympathetic to a certain degree for Jewish status, absolutely. And in fact, we know from historical records that his great-great-great-grandfather on his mother's side, great-great-great-grandfather on his mother's side was Jewish. He lived in one of the shtetls.
Rabbi, a lot of the early leaders and supporters of the Bolshevik Revolution were Jewish, so
Gary says a lot of leaders and supporters of the Bolshevik Revolution were Jewish, so that would make sense. We got to do this. Oy vey. Oy vey.
Yeah, well, they were Jewish simply because they were under the thumb in the Tsarist regime, under the Russian thumb. And you know something? When people are oppressed and there is a hope somewhere, they cling to that hope, no matter what the political bent of the hope is at the time.
Very good. Yes. Did you want to? Yeah, it is working. You just have to hold it up very, very close to your face. No, you just have to hold the mic up almost touching your lips. If I hold the mic up here, there's not a lot of amplification. So you've got to almost be right there touching your lips. Okay. So between 1918 and 1922, which was the Russian Revolution, which was the Red Army versus the White Army, and they fought more or less to a standoff during that time, there were many, many anti-Semitic attacks. There were many attacks by the Cossacks, and in 1919, there were Jewish property was seized in Ukraine and Belarus. There were communities that were dissolved, and there was no religious expression whatsoever. You were not allowed to you were not allowed to express your Jewishness, your Judaism. In 1923, the Red Army wins, and the Russian Revolution then is complete, and the Red Army wins, and so the socialism of Lenin takes over. During the Russian Revolution, Lenin had been very outspoken for workers' rights, people's rights, and we talked about last week that, the socialism was very attractive for Jews. It leveled the playing field, and we were way, way, way at the bottom of the playing field. So for us, it was a big move up. So Russian Jews embraced socialism. Lenin condemned the pogroms, even though some of his policies weren't totally pro-Jewish, but he condemned the pogroms. In 1926, there were 2,672,398 Jews in Russian territory. 59% of them lived in the Ukraine. 15% lived in Belarus. 22% lived in Russia proper, and 3.8% lived in other Russian republics. And they spoke Yiddish, which is not a surprise to any of us. And then in the 1930s, Stalin consolidates power. And Stalin creates what was called the Jewish Autonomous Oblast. An oblast is a territory. And if this is Russia here, the Jewish Autonomous Oblast was right here.
Is that Vorovozhan, whatever that Jewish city was? Is that where it was? There was a city that was pretty much almost 100% Jewish, Vorovozhan or something like that.
You know what? I don't know.
And I think that was the area that
And it very well could be, because Stalin wanted to create a place where all Jews would go. He wanted to get rid of the Jews, and he created a place. He said, well, if we establish a place for all of them to go, they'll all want to go there because it's a very Jewish place. But it turned out to be a total failure. It was labeled at the time the Soviet Zion. So Jews were leaving for Palestine. They were leaving for the United States. And then Stalin also made a place for them in the East. And the Jewish population of the Jewish Autonomous Oblast never reached even 30% Jewish. Yes?
So Rabbi, Belarus, Lithuania, and Ukraine, are they the Pale?
Yes.
Why they call it the Pale?
Okay. So why do they call it the Pale? What does Pale mean? Pale just means a territory, a region, a geographical area of settlement. And it was Lithuania, Belarus, Poland, Ukraine, and Crimea. And remember, we talked last week a little bit about, the status of Crimea, and that it was part of Russia from 1783. And then when Russia defeats the Ottomans in 1954, the Soviets transfer Crimea to Ukraine. And then, of course, as we know, in 2022, Russia invades to take it back. Did you find out some information, Joette?
The Jewish Autonomous Oblast is a federal subject of Russia in the Far East. No, sorry. The Jewish Autonomous Oblast is a federal subject of Russia in the Far East, bordering Khabarovsk Krai and Amur Oblast in Russia, and Heilongjiang Province in China. Its administrative center is the town of Birobidzhan. That's the one that I had heard of previously.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Say again? Is it Siberia? No, because it's not in the north. It's in the southeast. Siberia is in the northeast. And so we can understand, look, what Stalin was trying to do in some ways was exactly what Hitler had been trying to do as well, which is, Hitler's plan in the beginning, plan A for Hitler, was make life miserable for the Jews so that they leave. And they'll all want to go. That never happened. The Jews didn't leave. They thought it was going to blow over pretty quickly. Hitler was very temporary, and it would be fine ultimately. We know how incredibly horrific the results of that decision were. Stalin had people leaving, and he said, well, I'm going to make a place in the East where all of them will go to as well. In the same way, Hitler wanted to deport Jews to the island of Madagascar. The island wasn't big enough, and Great Britain controlled the seas at that time during the war, so that plan never materialized. But plan A for Hitler was always make life miserable so that they leave on their own. And then, of course, we talked at the end of last week, that the big problem came when he invaded Poland. And now there were millions and millions of Jews in the Reich. In the same way that when Catherine the Great took over one of the partitions of Poland, she inherited lots of Jews as well. And so her solution was to confine all the Jews to the Pale of Settlement. They couldn't enter Russia proper. Hitler's plan, of course, after the invasion of Poland, it was, okay, now we have all these Jews. We can't make life miserable enough for them to leave. Forget it. That plan won't work anymore. and they don't have anywhere to go. We just have to get rid of them. And that's, of course, when we have the plans for the horrific final solution comes up after Hitler invades Poland, and that's why most of the concentration camps were located in Poland, because that's where most of the Jews were. So Stalin creates this little area for Jews. First of all, it would never have been large enough to house all of the Russian Jews at that time. It's a very tiny little place, you can see. But it didn't work. It didn't work. So by 1941, right in the middle of World War II, by 1941, there were 4.8 million Jews living in Russian territory. That was 30% of the worldwide population of Jews. Basically 1/3 of all Jews in the world during World War II lived in Russia. They lived mostly in what is now the Ukraine and in Belarus. We have figures from the Holocaust. Approximately 2 million Soviet Jews died in the Holocaust, and that number of Jews who died was second only to the number of Jews in Poland. So if there were 4.8 million Jews and 2 million of them died, so that leaves us another 2.8 million. Starting in 1941, we have many horrific pogroms and executions. Probably the most famous that you've heard of is Baba Yar, which is a large ravine in Kiev, and over 33,000 Jews were murdered at Baba Yar, and it was only one of 6 or 7 equally horrific mass executions. And I think many of us have seen the just horrible film of, Jews having to line up, they kill them and then they fall in, and then another group lines up, they kill them and they fall in, another group. It's just, it's unimaginable. It's unimaginable, that kind of barbarism. And Stalin, of course, was very anti-Semitic. So during World War II, Stalin, Hitler, and who was for the United States? Who was president? Roosevelt, okay. Yes. Gary says Roosevelt personally was not as anti-Semitic as the State Department. And to an extent, that's true. But the United States was very anti-Semitic at that time. Stalin and Hitler, extremely so, we know. In August of 1952, we have what's called the Night of the Murdered Poets. And there were 13 Yiddish writers and poets, the top of their field, the cream of the crop of Yiddish writers and poets who were executed. Stalin was felt very threatened by the Jews. The Jews were very educated. A number of them, anyway, were educated. And so as Jews had left Russia starting in 1881, there was what is popularly known as a brain drain, right? The smartest minds left. And Stalin was both annoyed at that, and he was annoyed that that the Jews were organized and they stuck together, and he felt threatened by that. Yeah, of course.
Just to put it in historical perspective, Stalin wasn't only anti-Jewish, he was brutal to anybody who was in his way or he perceived to be a threat equally.
Very good, very good. Yes.
It didn't help the Jewish cause that one of Stalin's most notable opponents was none other than Trotsky, who was Jewish, and murdered in Mexico by Stalin's orders.
Yes, thank you, Zisel. That's a very good point. And so one of the things that Stalin did was he completely stamped out political Zionism, basically Zionism in general. And so Jews were not leaving Russia. He didn't allow Jews to leave Russia. By 1965, Leningrad had 169,000 Jews, and the Great Choral Synagogue in Leningrad. Has anyone ever? Joette, yes?
And Rosie and I.
Saw the Great Choral Synagogue. So just do a 1 minute.
I think we talked about it last week. Go ahead, go
I
ahead.
mentioned it last week.
Okay. So apparently it's a very beautiful synagogue. It has 1,200 seats. And at that time, certainly in 1965, most Jews were not religious at all. But they did go to the Great Choral Synagogue on very special Jewish occasions, on some of the holidays. But in general, no. From 1960 to 1970, Jews wanted to leave, but they were prevented from leaving. And I remember as a child, I didn't quite understand what was going on, but I remember as a child that there were all kinds of efforts to get Russian Jews out.
I remember as an adult.
Well, does anyone want to? It's an important part of our history. Do you want to comment on that just a little bit? As I said, I was a child, so I kind of remember
Well,
it happening, but
In the, I guess 60s also, but in the 60s and 70s, we did a lot of the twinning b'nai mitzvah, where a child who was bar or bat mitzvah would have a twin in Russia who couldn't have a bar or bat mitzvah and would make that child from Russia part of their bar or bat mitzvah ceremony. But that's also when we started having the Matzah of Redemption, I think it was, at Seder's, where there was a special reading that was done at Seder's for the Jews of Russia who were trying to get out. There was a whole thing with the refuseniks, and I told you about meeting some refuseniks. That was in the 80s. So there were a lot of front forward in our minds things going on with Russian Jews, and then of course Sharansky was the famous one who got out, and that kind of put a highlight on it for the rest of the world.
I know that my husband's
closer.
yeah. My husband's cousin, went to Russia and brought like prayer books and stuff to refugees. My husband told me that there were many missions going there, which was not so easy to get there at that time, but American Jews were doing it.
Amazing. It's more difficult for me to get up now than it was 20 years ago. I remember when my son was bar mitzvah that they had this twinning program that every bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah would twin with a Jewish child in the Soviet Union territories that could not they could not celebrate their B'nai Mitzvot.
Oh, right. It's okay.
I just have to add something from the history, which I know from the history in Russia, that there were a few things that happened to Russian Jews. One of them was the big doctor's trial, which was in 1930s, and because Stalin was very anti-Semitic and he was paranoid, and he thought that those doctors who were around him, taking care of him, were conspired to kill him. So it was first of those big trials, political trials he made in Russia and then around the world. And they all were hanged, all those doctors. And another piece is that many Russian Jews escaped by going to the east, going to Kazakhstan. As the Germans were going forward, they retreated to that part of Russia and they survived there.
Gary and I have been members here, well over 40 years, and I remember that we adopted a Russian family, and I can't remember was that in the 80s that we did that? And I know what a hard time the families had, especially the mother, I think, was a doctor, and the husband was an engineer, and of course he didn't speak the language, but I think the mother was able to get a job in healthcare, but not as a doctor, and they struggled. And their young children, I'm sure, all grown up now and have professional jobs. But we adopted that family, and I'm sure other shuls did too.
Where did they live?
Well, they lived in the neighborhood here in North Hollywood, and they came to services. They were very happy to have been adopted, and they integrated themselves here.
So when you
But it
say
was
we,
rough.
You're talking about
We're talking about Adada Riel. Adada Riel adopted that Russian family.
Thank you. Did someone else want to mention something? Ken?
Just as a side issue, when Stalin died, he had a heart attack, and his doctors were told that if he lived, they'd kill them.
Wow. Melinda?
I just want to make a comment on the twinning program. They would when we were kids, we can get a name of a teenager, and then on a chair, usually on the bima or someplace, they would put a talit on the chair and a kippah on the chair that would actually represent the child that was there. So it was we actually had names.
That's beautiful. Yes, Cecil.
I just wanted to share with you an anecdote that I read long time ago, probably in the 60s. Anyhow, you all heard or remember one of Stalin's ministers, Molotov? Well, Molotov. Yeah, but it's Molotov cocktail, named after him. But Molotov was I think, minister of state or something. Anyhow, Molotov's daughter in the 60s was living in the kibbutz in Israel.
Oh, wow. Wow, wow. So, to end this part of the discussion, I remember, let's see, at that time I was in Hebrew school. And so I remember in Hebrew school that we had to try to get prayer books together to send over and try to raise money. Somehow we had some functions that were trying to raise money. This was pre-bar mitzvah for me, so I just kind of have a snapshot in my head about that time, but I remember it. Yes, Sharansky was the leading refusnik. Yes. Not quite upstate New York, but in Rockland County. Rockland County. Rockland County is about an hour north of New York City. That's where Muncie is, which is the huge Hasidic enclave. I remember when we were going up Route 59, we had to pass it there and back, and always Hasidic Jews walking and much closer to New York. Between New York and Albany, much closer to New York. Yeah, right. We were half an hour away from White Plains and the Tappan Zee Bridge. That's where my dad used to work in White Plains. Yes.
As you all know, I have a very Orthodox family in Toronto. And one of the children, his name is Elisha, was sent to Muncie when he was about, I don't know, maybe 12, 13, something like that, to live in a rabbi's house and to study there. And out of her 8 children, this is the only one who is not religious. He had it up to there, I'd say. It was a very difficult situation. He was in the basement with like 3 other guys living there. And it was just over the top for him. I mean, he's a lovely guy. He's wonderful. But he has, and he is very respectful. He lives in his parents' home still. He makes his own living and all. But he never, became religious again.
Thank you. So between 1960 and 1970 especially, this period we're talking about, the 60s and early 70s, there were, Russia only allowed 4,000 Jews to leave. However, in 1989, then Gorbachev, say again? Glasnost, which means openness. So there was a relaxing of the rules and opening of the rules, and so 71,000 Jews in 1989 were granted permission to leave. 12,000 of them left for Israel and continued to go to Israel over that decade. Today, let's see, in 2002, there were 232,000 Jews in Russia. By 2021, only 83,896. Only. Most of them living in Moscow, some living in St. Petersburg and Leningrad, and then a much smaller portion of the Jews living in the Crimea. And overwhelmingly, Russian Jews identify as secular. They identify ethnically as Jews, but not religiously. And well, we see this all over the world. Jews identifying as ethnic but not religious. And that number is shrinking. The total number of Jews out of assimilation and intermarriage, then the children grow up without any significant religious upbringing, and and it's the same thing when I have interfaith couples come to see me. It's like, I'm certainly not going to condemn two people who found each other who are in love. I mean, love is really hard to find in this world. So when you find it, grab it. That's my feeling. But it does present some significant problems for our people. It does. And that's just the way it is. And so I always counsel those families, when you have children, when you have children, then pick a religion, one of your religions, and raise the child in that religion. Obviously, my strong preference is that you choose Judaism. But pick one religion. Don't say, I'm going to expose the children to all religions and they can choose when they're old enough. Because it never, never, never works. Never works. They choose nothing when they grow up. They choose nothing. And so raise them in one religion, and I hope that it's going to be Judaism, because we need more Jewish children, clearly. So through assimilation and intermarriage, the population who identify as Jews in Russia is declining. So where do these, as I told you earlier, where do we have synagogues? Well, in terms of mainstream synagogues, we have 4 in Moscow, 1 in St. Petersburg, 1 in the Jewish Autonomous Oblast, 1 in Kemerovo Oblast, and there are maybe 10 more oblasts, little areas, and there are like 10 more smaller synagogues. But what we do have is a whole bunch of Chabad. Lots and lots of Chabad. Easily over 20, 25 Chabad houses all throughout Russia. Which is why I always say, you know what? Good job, Chabad. Thank you so much, because you're doing great work. It's not what I personally want for myself, but good for you, because you are doing really important work and you are doing good work, and so good for you, Chabad, to your strength. and partly because of Chabad, and partly because of the move forward in time, there is some renewed interest in religious expression of Judaism. Even though there are a smaller number of Jews, those Jews who are there, and especially among the young people, there is a curiosity, there is some small intention to proceed more religiously with Judaism.
Out of the 83,000 Jews who remain in Russia, what percentage of them, if you would know, actually practice their Judaism?
What percentage actually practice their Judaism? A very small percentage. It's a very small percent. I don't have the exact numbers, but a very small percentage. But maybe little by little growing a little bit.
When did the numbers change? At one point, nobody did have any religion. When did that change when it opened up?
Oh, well, that changed in 1989 with Glasnost. Yes. So the question was, for a long time, Russian Jews were completely secular. They weren't allowed to practice any kind of religion. Certainly during communism, for sure. And so then the question, nobody could, yes. And so then the question was, when did that change? And a lot of it changed with Gorbachev. A lot of it changed in 1989. What we see now, what I see now all the time, because I do a lot of funerals, and I do many Russian funerals, is it's understandable but very sad. It happens more and more frequently that I will go to say Kaddish at the end, and nobody knows how to say Kaddish. And I mean, I can't get mad. They weren't allowed. They never learned it. They weren't allowed to learn it. So I can't get mad. I just think, oh, gosh, what a tragedy. If there's one prayer that that every single one of us should know how to say, in my opinion, it's Kaddish. We just should know how to say it. Even if we're reading it, we don't have to have it memorized, but we should know how to say it.
We heard about Lenin, we heard about Stalin. How about Putin? What is his attitude towards the Jews? Do you know?
What do we think about Putin?
Well, we don't like the man, but
Any thoughts?
For a while, Putin was very close to Chabad. If I remember right, he even participated in something. I'm not sure, but they were like, very supportive of them. If it lasted, I don't know.
Yes.
Stalin grew up with a number of Jewish friends. And there are a number of Jewish oligarchs who have, Putin, pardon me. And he grew up with a number of Jewish friends, and there are a number of Jewish oligarchs who are extremely wealthy, and some have been forced to leave Russia. They own football teams around the world. They own lots of stuff. I think it was the aluminum industry that one of them is in charge of, essentially.
Yep. So, yes, my understanding is that certainly as it is presented to the world, who knows what Putin thinks exactly. I don't know about likes the Jews, but I think he certainly is not anti-Semitic in that sense. If he is, he keeps it to himself. But, as you correctly pointed out, there are a number of oligarchs who are Jewish, who have thrived in Russia. So he can't be anti-Semitic that way because he would never have let them thrive. I think we would have to say he's kind of neutral, and he allows Judaism to be what it will be. Okay, let me finish with this. So, today, Russian Jews are 15% of the population. That's the largest Russian Jewish population in the world, followed by the United States, then followed by Germany, Canada, Australia, and Finland. Finland has a Jewish population. In fact, one of my former congregants, his son lives in Finland and goes to services in Finland. It's interesting to hear the stories about, in Finland, half the year is dark, basically. And so they have to really navigate when is sundown, when is sun up, Shabbat, holidays, etc. It's not a simple thing. Last comment.
Another
Another grandson. Just had a week in Finland. All expenses paid to play in a jazz festival in Finland. Wonderful. 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 Yes.
I just want to tell you a little something. My grandmother came to the United States from Russia, Poland, in 1918 when she was 14 years old. And in the late 1960s, a lot of Russians came to the United States. They settled in Brighton Beach in New York, where my grandmother lived. And that was 50 years after she had arrived. And she started helping the Russian families get acclimated. And 50 years after not having spoken Russian at all, she was able to help them with her Russian language skills.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. So, I'm not going to see you for a little bit. My understanding is we're off for the next 2 weeks for Pesach. And then I am leaving on the 30th for Mauritius. And I'll be gone for 2 weeks, 2 Wednesdays. Mauritius is off the coast of Africa, the eastern coast of Africa. It's one of the most beautiful islands in the world. You were there. Did you love it? Oh. So I'm going to see you a month from today. I hope all of you have a beautiful, sweet Passover. And I'll see you in 4 weeks.
All right, we wish you well. We wish you a beautiful holiday in Mauritius. And I know. We'll miss you, though.
Thank you very much.
So we'll find a substitute. Buen viaje. Enjoy. Thank you. All right, Diana wanted me to mention that today she has spaghetti and vegetables. So if you want to head over to the cafe after class, she'll welcome you there. Diana's head of our cafe, the Adat Cafe over here. Yes.
When will this be meeting again? Right after Passover? Or
Yes, we'll be gone for 2 weeks. And I think the 17th, is it, Susie, the 17th and the 24th Wednesdays, holiday. And it's the same thing every year, that we're off, because people need to prepare for the Seder, and then, of course...
And then will we be meeting at the same time?
Oh, yes, it should be... We'll have coverage. You know, this has come up before when Rabbi had funerals and all that. We were able to, probably one of the rabbis, the other rabbis will come in to cover. Or someone else. Dos semanas. So we're off. Don't show up next week. We'll be on holiday. 2 weeks. We'll send out an email, too, to remind you, okay?
Yeah. Can you send me an email about it? Okay.
Because they have the meetings in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
and this is the current one.
I don't see
But
any.
they have meetings in Los Angeles.
Oh, and to have one in the valley would be
Here's
helpful.
the last email I sent to Jessica, and I imagine it's not her, under her auspices or her authority.
Okay, I'll look into it. Okay. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Haggadah, wow.
That's where they have it
In the museum. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Oh, it's gorgeous. Wow. When were you there? Oh. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Hold on 1 second. Oh, sure. There. Yeah, you can take that. Hold on. So I have a confession and then a self-congratulatory statement. So I just want to preface by letting you know it's self-congratulatory. So my confession is as follows. Most weeks I come in here and I look on the board at whatever Rabbi Goodman has written, and I have no idea what went on in the last class. That's my confession. This week, however, I know what went on. You talked about the first Aliyah. Among other things, because these are the two most prominent, Bilu and Chovevei Tzion, were two of the most prominent early Zionist entities in Russia at the end of the 19th century that were promoters of Aliyah. And so these are the two groups, Bilu, and that's an acronym for Beit Yaakov L'chuv V'Nelcha, like House of Jacob, let's go. Like, get on and go. Where are we going? To Israel. And then Chovevei Tzion, the lovers of Zion. There's a political difference between the two of them. I can't remember what it is. Does anyone remember what's the difference? Did Rabbi Goodman go over that? I can't remember. So there's a political difference, and it's too unseemly to talk about. Meaning I can't remember what it is, so I can't include it. I have no idea if it's unseemly or not. So anyway, these two organizations, these two groups are, and if you think about this, these are the early Zionists. I mean, these are first Aliyah, which I think numbered about 30,000 Jews in total who moved from Russia as a result of the pogroms to Eretz Yisrael and begin to establish most of them moved to Petach Tikva, folks like David Ben Gurion. They moved to Petach Tikva. Some people moved to other cities around there, like Rishon LeZion, the one up north, Rosh Hanikra, and then there's also, they moved to Zichron Yaakov. And in Zichron Yaakov, by the way, if our relatives were in Russia and they moved to Zichron Yaakov, and they kept their land there, that is some pretty expensive real estate these days in Zichron Yaakov. And in Zichron Yaakov, there is a beautiful museum dedicated to the first Aliyah. So anyway, that is the first Aliyah, and it's my self-congratulatory. So next, don't quiz me about what Rabbi Goodman is talking about normally, because usually, again, I have no idea. I just happened to run into it, and I knew this. Okay, so, but what I want to talk about is Pesach, and a particular story. So I'm sitting there, and Joette says to me, this is one of my favorite pieces of the Haggadah. Okay, it was one of Marv's favorites. So we're going to read it, and then I am going to give an interpretation of it. I'm going to ask you why you think this is included. I'm going to tell you why I think it's included, and then I'm going to hear what you think is an interpretation of it, and then I'm going to offer a new interpretation based on an essay by Jonathan Sachs. So this source sheet was actually put together by another rabbi. He put it based on this essay, and I'm just going to use it because I was reading the essay and I saw there was a source sheet on it. So I didn't put together the source sheet, but so none of this is original thought of mine is what I'm trying to get at. I didn't do the source sheet. I didn't come up with the theory. All I did was read the essay and make photocopies, and that's what I'm teaching you today. But I did know about the first Aliyah. Okay. Okay. So here it is. We're on source number 1. Would someone like to claim the second microphone and read for us this famous passage from the Haggadah? Zissel, go ahead. You read it like a Jew. Come on, nice and loud. Yeah. All right, good.
Pesach Haggadah, Magid, story of the 5 rabbis. It happened once on Pesach that Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon were reclining in Bnei Brak and were telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. That whole night, until their students came and said to them, the time of reciting the morning Shema has arrived.
Okay. Thank you. Zissel, well done. He read it like a Jew. So my question is, wait, this is, okay. So a little story. So these rabbis, right? The 5 rabbis, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Tarfon. These are pretty familiar names, yes? Right? Okay. We don't know all extensive of their biographies. Who's the most famous out of them all? Right, okay. He's actually not the most important one in this story. But that it's in Bnei Brak is relevant because Rabbi Akiva, that was his home synagogue. So it seems like he was the rabbi of Bnei Brak. So it seems like Rabbi Akiva is the host. We'll get to this in just a second. Elazar ben Azariah is of particular import, as is Rabbi Yoshua. And I'll talk about those guys in just a second. And Rabbi Tarfon, I'm sure he's significant too. The only thing I have to remember, I can tell you about Rabbi Tarfon is one of my friends in yeshiva was asked by his rabbi to read out loud. And he read a passage including Rabbi Tarfon. But as reading it, instead of calling it, this was in the late 80s. So instead of saying Rabbi Tarfon, he called him Rabbi Carphone. And he got kicked out of class. So he said, Rabbi Carphone Omer. And the rabbi goes, you, get out of here, you wise guy. So anyway, Rabbi Carphone, I think about that every time. Okay, so this is embedded in the Magid section of our Haggadah. The Haggadah is divided into 15 sections. The longest and most extensive is the Magid section, which is the telling. And there's all sorts of different quotes and things, the Manish Tanah, the 4 children, all of this. And these 5 rabbis at Bnei Brak. So, Joette, can you tell me, I'm putting you on the spot here, why this was Marv's favorite piece and or why you like it as well? And then I'm going to ask if any of you have any thoughts about what's going on here or why, like, here's the question I have. Big whoop. Like, who cares? Like, big deal. So a bunch of rabbis got together. They had a Passover Seder, and it lasted until dawn. Shocking. They're a bunch of rabbis. They like talking. What's the big deal? Why is this relevant?
Okay.
Shema is early in the morning.
When the sun
It has
comes
to
up.
be, yeah, right early in the morning. It's in the morning. So they pulled an all-nighter, essentially, talking about Pesach. And Janice, you are correct that there is a discussion about time that I'll get to, which we can loop back in there. But it's clear they stayed up all night.
So
Go ahead.
What Marv loved about it is the number of questions that it poses.
Okay, go ahead.
So the question is, number 1, why are all these 5 rabbis there and not with their families for Pesach Seder? Another question, why don't they know that it's morning? Where are they in such a place that they can't tell? Are they hiding someplace in a cave? I mean, they don't know. And why aren't their students with them? Their students are not with them. Their students are in a place where they know where it's light, but they have to come in and tell the rabbis it's time for Shema. So it kind of questions what these rabbis were doing besides just having a Seder.
Good. And so Marv that is how I normally introduce this piece. Yeah, we all read the same articles. So, like, we sit down, and probably as late as last year, I told my kids, you know what's going on here? And they say, what? And I say, it's Bar Kokhba's rebellion. They're without their families. They're alone. And they're taking extra time because they're planning the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which was a rebellion against the Roman Empire in the 2nd century, which is after the destruction of the Second Temple, as a way of saying enough of these Romans. Now what happens is by the way, let's pause here. How did the Bar Kokhba, so by the way, Rabbi Sachs says, Rabbi Labinger, Rabbi Schuldenfrei, you're both wrong. No way. This is not the Bar Kokhba rebellion. He says, not a chance. And so we'll discuss why he doesn't think it is that and what he thinks it is in this class. So it was a perfect lead in. It was almost like I planted you there. But, okay, so first of all, this is why Rabbi Sachs thinks it's not a rebellion. How did the Bar Kokhba rebellion go? Poorly would be an understatement, right? Poorly. Right? Like when my sons come home from school, they say, "How your test?" I say, "How your test go?" Poorly. That means a big F, right? That happened last week. I was like, "What do you mean poorly? Like, where are we supposed to be studying?" Okay, so that this is, by the way, it comes. It seems at least that why would they put in the Haggadah like a recollection of a rebellion that was almost like so devastating to the Jewish people? I mean, what results from this is the Jews are banned. After the destruction of the Second Temple, the Jews are allowed to stay in Jerusalem. It's only after the Bar Kokhba rebellion that Jews are kicked out. Like, no more Jews. Jerusalem is renamed, and it's made into a pagan Roman city. So, like, why would they put this in the Haggadah? It's like, yeah, let's talk about the one time we stayed up all night planning for an event that precipitated our devastation. And furthermore, Rabbi Sachs points out that there's no, like, indication that, like, why would the text lie? Like maybe they are talking about Passover the whole night. Why would, about the story? Why would the text lie? So he says it's got to be something else. And this is what he suggests. Okay, the first is he looks at the way these sages are introduced. Who's the first sage? Eliezer. And look on that little graph on the, not the graph, the little, on the bottom of page 1 of the first page. You see where it has all those names in the Hebrew? Okay. So Eliezer, who's the second one? Yeshua. Eleazar ben Azariah is next, then Akiva, then Rabbi Tarfon. And he wonders, Rabbi Sachs, based on another source, which I'm not going to get into, if this is in some ways a seating chart for the Seder. Yeah, it's a seating chart. So first is Eliezer, then Yoshua, then Eleazar ben Azariah, then Akiva, and then Rabbi Tarfon. Who's in the center? Eleazar ben Azariah is in the center. Okay. And the two most peripheral are Eliezer and Rabbi Tarfon. They are the least authoritative. And right next to Eleazar ben Azariah is Rabbi Yoshua on one side and Rabbi Akiva on the other side. And this would make sense because, as I told you, Rabbi Akiva is the host. It's in Bnei Brak. So it's like when the synagogue has a program, the rabbi of the synagogue gets to sit on the dais, right? Right? Like if you have a program, you're honoring the host. So he's up there. He's next to Elazar ben Azariah, who's center. And Rabbi Yoshua is there used to be a Nasi in Roman times, which was the head or the president, the Nasi of the Jewish community. And Rabbi Yoshua was his assistant. And so, guess who's the Nasi, or the head of the Jewish community? Elazar ben Azariah. And he's in the center. So the dais seems to comply with the roles of the rabbis of that time. Eliezer and Rabbi Tarfon are on the periphery. They're more peripheral positions. Rabbi Yoshua, who is the assistant head of the Jewish community, is seated next to the head. Rabbi Akiva, who's the host rabbi, is also right up there. Now, you're saying, wait a second, Elazar ben Azariah, wouldn't that mean that he would have to, if Yoshua is the vice president, does that mean that Elazar ben Azariah is the president? And you're thinking, I don't really know the name Elazar ben Azariah so well. Was he president? And the truth is, he was president for a very short period of time of the Jewish community. And here is why he was president. It used to be the president was Rabban Gamliel. But look at Rabban Gamliel. Turn to page 3. So it says, Tosefta Pesachim 10:12. Tosefta is part of the same time text as a Mishnah, which is the earliest rabbinic text. We talked about what a Mishnah was last time. Those were the direct, like how to cook, and very short, direct. Anyway, Tosefta is the material that doesn't get included in the Mishnah. It's like the extra editing room. Like how when they make a movie and there's like extra stuff and it gets included on the Blu-ray thing that they buy at Best Buy for $1 gazillion after. That's the Tosefta. It's the extra. It's the cutouts. Okay. Once Rabban Gamliel and the elders were reclining in the house of Boethius ben Zunin in Lod, and they were occupied in studying the laws of Pesach all that night until the cock crowed. They lifted the table, made themselves ready, and went to the house of study to pray. That story sounds sort of similar. Bunch of rabbis, pull an all-nighter, Passover, and then they go study, and then they go pray. And the other one that we were just reading, bunch of rabbis in Bnei Brak, they are telling the story of Passover the whole night until their students come and say it's time for the morning prayers. There's a lot of overlap. So what Rabbi Sachs suggests is that it's actually the same night, but two different locations. Because Rabban Gamliel, the guy from the second group, he wasn't invited to Bnei Brak. And the reason that Rabban Gamliel wasn't invited to Bnei Brak, to the first party, these guys, is because he used to be the head, the president of the Jewish community. But then he had a few embarrassing incidents. And let me explain those. So again, what Rabbi Sachs suggests is the story that Zissel read, that Joette said was and I have said in the past, was about Bar Kokhba. This Seder in Bnei Brak is a parallel Seder that's going on that purposefully does not include Rabban Gamliel, who used to be in the place of Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Gamliel used to be the president of the Jewish community. Any clarification questions? Why is he no longer there? There are 3 incidents that describe what happened to him, why he was no longer there. And so here are the 3 stories of what happened to him, of why he's no longer there. The first one is this. Rabban Gamliel and his vice president. Now, let's say there's a vice president, and the president have a disagreement. Who wins? President. Vice President Harris can have her opinion. And she should share that opinion with the president in the Oval Office. If the president disagrees with her, what should she do? Shut up and toe the company line. That's the job of the vice president. So, now there may be meetings where it would be appropriate for her or any other vice president to voice in and say, hey, this is what I think, but at a certain point you got to shut up, okay? Now, how the president responds to the vice president would be indicative of what kind of person this is. So let's see how Rabban Gamliel, who at the time, before Elazar ben Azariah, was the president, how he responded to when his vice president, Rabbi Yoshua, so the vice president stays the same. The vice president here is Rabbi Yoshua. He's sitting right next to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Elazar ben Azariah becomes the president. Yoshua maintains his office as the vice president. Why is Rabban Gamliel not the president anymore during the Seder in Bnei Brak? That's the question that we're addressing. 3 things that happened when Rabban Gamliel was the president and Rabbi Yoshua was his vice president. So the first instance is they had a disagreement about what would happen with a sacrifice of a cow that had a cleft lip. Is that cow kosher for a sacrifice or not? Right. Well, so So they have a disagreement about that. I don't remember who decides what, but guess what happened? Instead, they have a disagreement, and Gamliel, who's the president, gets his way. But instead of just telling, hey, we disagree and let bygones be bygones, Gamliel makes him stand in disgrace, like stand in the corner of the assembly of advisors. Okay. The other sages who are there, it's like a cabinet meeting, and they make the vice president stand in the corner. That's what's happening here. Humiliating. The other sages say, hey, not nice. And he persists. Gamliel persists. The second is an instance where Rabban Gamliel is president, Rabbi Yeshua is vice president, and they have a calendar disagreement. By the way, you think that the cow thing is small. It's not small. The cow example is small, but it's not small because it could be also revealing of a socioeconomic difference. A cow is that's a big deal sacrifice. And whether or not you accept something to be given at the temple, that's a big deal. Now, just because the temple has already been destroyed for 50 or so years when they're having this, but they're trying to determine what they think God wants. And also, is this donation an acceptable donation? And you can almost feel is there an economic, wait, someone who knows that the guy didn't have a lot of money, and are you going to make him bring a different cow? Anyway, they have, again, I don't remember who said which which way. But the way the president, Rabban Gamliel, reacts, not nice. The sages warn him about it. They say, we don't like the way you're acting. Second instance, Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua have a disagreement over the calendar. They disagree with which day will be Yom Kippur. That's a big calendar difference. That's a big deal, right? Whoa. One of them says Yom Kippur is on Tuesday. One of them says Yom Kippur is on Wednesday. So Rabban Gamliel makes Rabbi Yoshua carry his staff and his coins to him, to Rabban Gamliel, to the president, on the day that Rabbi Yoshua calculates is Yom Kippur. So in other words, he says, my day, I'm the president, that's Yom Kippur. You disagree with me. Don't have like a mini Yom Kippur. Come to me and break the holiday to show me that you accept my authority. And guess what? That's exactly what Rabbi Yoshua does. Rabbi Yoshua concedes the point. The president gets to set the policy. The president gets to set the calendar. And so he agrees. But again, like, is he dictatorial? Then lastly, there's a question about whether or not Mariv, the evening prayer, is obligatory or optional. And there's differences of opinions. So like next time you're in Mariv, you'd be like, no, I'm not sure I'm doing this. You know, it's not optional, right? Optional for my kids who are high school students, it means opt out. That's what they think optional is. But anyway, so they're optional. And again, they have a difference of opinion. And Rabban Gamliel, once again, not only gets Rabbi Yoshua to concede, but Rabban Gamliel makes Rabbi Yoshua stand in the corner. Again, during these deliberations. And the rest of the sages say, enough. We've had enough of this. You're ruling like a dictator. You can have a difference of opinion. That's okay. There's plenty of matters. The Talmud celebrates all of these differences of opinions. We are a people of disagreement, but disagreement doesn't give you the right to be disagreeable. There is, like the overriding commandment should be don't be a jerk. And so guess what the rabbis do? They fire him. They say get him out. So the rabbis fire the president. And in his stead, they install a young man named Elazar ben Azariah. So from his place here in the center, by the way, Rabban Gamliel, to his credit, he apologizes, he makes tshuva, and he's restored in his office. But based on this seating chart, this Seder in Bnei Brak must have been in between the time that he got fired and rehired, because there's a different president. This is the only time that Rabban Elazar ben Azariah is president, and it's only like a temporary appointment until Rabban Gamliel apologizes. So his position here, Elazar ben Azariah is not greater than Rabbi Akiva. He's here by the office that he holds. And so this gives us an indication of what time this is all occurring. So again, I'll get to your question in just 1 second, Joette. It seems like Rabban Gamliel, by the way, Rabban Gamliel was the first, this is like shortly after the destruction of of the Second Temple, because Rabban Gamliel was one of the first heads of the committee, of the community. So this, we now kind of have like an understanding, if this is a seating chart, based on the juxtaposition of the rabbis, we know what is when this occurs. And we also know that there's a sensitivity to derech eretz, to your derech eretz. What's derech eretz? Like the way you conduct yourself, like your nice, how you behavior, like good, like normal behavior, right? So right. So there's a sensitivity in the society because you just had this dictatorial president, Nasi of the Jewish community, who's like embarrassing his vice president 3 times. They boot him, and then they put in another president. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a second. Questions? Go ahead.
I have a note here from Peter Levitan, who is watching at home.
Yes.
And he says that there's scholarship, notwithstanding the popular misunderstanding. The 5 rabbis meeting was not a Seder, but at a different time of the year.
Okay. So good. We'll disagree. Okay, so it's so Peter says right, you could make that case. I can see what he's saying. Right, like here, like I'm beginning to look over my Pesach material. This is what Peter's saying. It works. It's not a crazy read. It doesn't say it's Passover. It says they were, but I'm now going to make the case against it. It said they were like hanging out in Bnei Brak, and they were talking about the Yetziah from Egypt. They were talking about. No, but you see that's in parentheses. It doesn't actually say that in the Hebrew. But I'll tell you why I think Peter's wrong. Or Peter, like I'm sure Peter's quoting someone who's reputable. No, but I'm not going to make him stand in the corner. No, I think it's a good read because look, you could make this case, but there's a verb in there. There's a word in there that gives, I think, is like a wink that it is Passover. That rabbis get together and they study. In fact, like, I'm part of the rabbinical assembly. Now we're not going to get together in Bnei Brak. Conservative rabbis really don't hang out in Bnei Brak these days. It's a Haredi town. There's not a conservative rabbi convention in Bnei Brak, but we do have like learning sessions together. Let's say it gets really good and we end up talking all night. Okay, so this is what he's saying. Like they're getting ready for Passover. They're talking about the Yetziah, the Exodus from Mitzrayim, from Egypt, and they get carried away in their material and they go all night long, and that's good. And like that, you could see that happening. It's plausible. The reason I don't think that's the case is the word misubin on line 2. First page. Maaseh b'Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbi Yoshua v'Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah v'Rabbi Akiva v'Rabbi Tarfon shehayu misubin b'Vnei Brak. They were reclining. The word misubin is the word for reclining that we get from where? 4 questions. Pesach. That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to recline because you're emulating the Roman Greco Symposium, right? Where there's like someone dropping grapes in your mouth. Right? Like that's what it's, because the rabbis who are concocting this are thinking, we're celebrating our freedom. Who are the most free people? The citizens and the ones who can recline like this. So you recline. Why do you recline to your left? There's 2 reasons. Because most people need their right hand. So you recline and you eat. Yeah. So. No corner. We tell him that It's funny. So anyway, so we have, I think it is Passover, but it doesn't say it's Passover. No, what I'm saying in that is that the translation there includes on Pesach in parentheses. It's not in the Hebrew. The translator is assuming it's Passover. Peter's saying, I don't make that assumption. I'm with the translator in this one, but I think Peter could make the argument that he's making. Okay, so I want to, go ahead, Los.
Maybe you can just repeat what I'm going to, my question is, if they were studying the laws of Pesach, to me, then it would seem like it, in spite of the word reclining, that they're preparing for Pesach, because why would you be studying the laws if it was already Pesach?
They're actually not, it's interesting here. This is one of the differences between this. So these 5 rabbis have a gathering, whether it's Passover or not. Rabban Gamliel wasn't invited to this party. He has a gathering on the 3rd page. They were occupied. It doesn't say, oh no, Shehayu Misubin. It uses the same language. But they weren't talking about the story. They were studying Oskin B'Hilchot HaPesach. Rabban Gamliel, there's a difference here. Gamliel's party, and then the 5 rabbis with the new president, including the new president. Okay, so one difference is it's Gamliel and nameless others. And here it's 5 rabbis named. The other difference is this is in Lod. Where's this? Bnei Brak. The other difference is here it's Hilchot Pesach. It's the laws of the HaPesach. And here it's the story. So you kind of get a different feel, like these are 2 different houses and they look different. So but
they're both reclining.
Yeah, they're both reclining. Reclining, both of them. So it seems at least that this is... The Misubin thing makes it seem like it's Passover. They seem to be a little bit more legally focused. They seem to be a little bit more narrative focused. Different locations. Gamliel seems like the kind of guy who, because he made his other assistant stand in the corner, so he's not going to name everyone who's at his Seder. They only want to know that it's Gamliel's Seder. So here's why I think that this is this is inserted here, and then this is not my idea. This is Rabbi Sachs's idea, and then I want to say what I think they're doing, what Rabbi Sachs says that they're doing. Actually, not me. The paragraph before this says the following: before you recite this in the Passover Haggadah, you say, even if we were all wise, all intelligent, all knowledgeable in the Torah, still the command would be upon us to tell of the coming out of Egypt. And the more one tells of the coming out of Egypt, the more admirable it is. Right. So from that, we learn everyone has, it's not only about the children, everyone has an opportunity, has to say. You have to do it even if you know the story. And you gotta, the more you tell, the longer you talk, the better it is. So then this, the B'nai Brak, is like a proof text of that. It's like, you're sitting at Passover, and I'm thinking, I've been a rabbi for 20 years. I got to tell the story again? Yes, you do. Because guess what? These guys did it. And guess what? I'm like, oh, the kids, they've heard the story. No, you got to do it. Oh, we'll keep it short this year. No, don't keep it short this year. Go all night long. This is like a proof example of what you should be doing. And that's why it's included. Now, why is it taking them all night long? And with this, I'm going to end. It goes back to the disagreement. Go back to the first page. You see where Rabbi Yoshua is? And you see where Rabbi Akiva is? They both have the ear of Elazar ben Azariah, who's the president. Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Yoshua, in a different place in the Talmud, have an argument about how about the timing of the Passover sacrifice, which then implies how long the Passover Seder can go on. One of them says it has to end at midnight, and one of them says all night long. It's Rabbi Yoshua who says all night long, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says midnight. And so, this example, in another place, they have an argument. The president says midnight. The guy on his vice president says all night long. What are they, in this instance, how long does it last? All night long. The president doesn't get his way. Or the president concedes the point. Why this is significant in the Passover Seder, I'm actually riffing a little bit. This is not exactly what Rabbi Sachs says. What's significant, maybe I'm going to give this over the holidays, that sounds good. What's significant about this instance is you used to have a president who was a dictator, Rabban Gamliel. He'd get his way, but he'd embarrass people. He embarrassed Rabbi Yoshua. Here, the president doesn't even get his way. He participates in a Seder that goes all night long, when in a different place in the Talmud, he said, cut off at midnight. Lights go out. Go home, everybody. He doesn't get his way. The new president doesn't get his way, whereas the old president got his way and embarrassed people. The new president doesn't get his way. He doesn't overrule Rabbi Yoshua, which he had the power to do. He participates in Rabbi Yoshua's all night long. I'll get to you in 1 second, Rosalie. And guess what? It doesn't end with discord and fighting. Rather, it ends with them sitting together for the entire evening. There's an opportunity here. They could, like, if the president insisted, he could have said, it's midnight, out. We're done. Time is over. But he doesn't. He represents a contrast to his predecessor, Rabban Gamliel, who's having a Seder someplace else in Lod. And you wonder how Rabban Gamliel would have treated the same situation. And here is leadership, not through dictatorship. That Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah shows the capacity. First of all, like Akiva and Rabbi Yoshua are just like more accomplished scholars than he is. And he cedes the point to them. He could have overruled them. And he could have embarrassed them. But instead, he participates in what they do, and they sit together for the duration of the evening. And I wonder about that as a model for us in Jewish community. You had Rabban Gamliel, the past president, who insisted on his way, which was his right, and then really like stuck your nose in it. And then we have a new president who doesn't do that. And he sits with there's an argument, and he sits with it, and he participates in it. And makes you wonder, I know which Seder I would rather be at. And what kind of Seder do we have? Okay, you had a question.
So I equate this situation with just having meetings, where you have a board of directors, you have a parliamentarian, and I see Rabbi Yeshua as a parliamentarian, and that he's giving his opinion on procedure, policy, whatever, and he's doing it based on his knowledge, and it wasn't accepted by the autocrat, who's Rabbi Gamliel. So, you can equate this, as you say, to modern, organizations and when you have meetings. So I can see how, yes, we would favor this over here, because what you're having discussion, and you have a parliamentarian and say, hey, that isn't how it should be. This is how it should be. And so, yes, what you're saying is correct, and I'd rather be over here.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts? It's going to be a difficult Seder this year for some of you. You may be with children or grandchildren who have different thoughts than you do about some very important things. A lot of people are worried about. I'm going to write a letter to the community before the holiday about Israel. So there are families that are going to attack it head on, and there are families that aren't going to go near it. There are families that are going to go ahead are going to address it and wish that they didn't. There's no formula for this. I just finished teaching the preschool parents where I said, look, know who's at your Seder. Design a Seder around the people who are there, and I would make that same recommendation in terms of the politics. And also, that's not to mention, there's the Israel component, which I think is on everyone's mind. And then it's also a very contentious political season, and people have strong feelings. And so I just hope that our Seders this year can be more like those at B'nai Brak, where there's that maybe it took all night long before Elazar ben Azariah finally agreed with Rabbi Yeshua, but they didn't get up, and they didn't end the Seder. And so I would just ask you to all think before you have the Seder, think of who's around your table, and think about what who they are, and then what you're going to say, because this can be a beautiful time of year, but it can also be a very, very hurtful. There's a lot of room for hurt, and so you don't want to be the breakup. What's recorded about Rabbi Gamliel is he's not invited back. Yeah, no, he does. But I'm not sure if it's a polemic or not. He is restored and he repents and all of that, but it's significant. What you're left with is, ooh, what a guy! What a tyrannical rule. Okay, so I think we will see everyone next week. Wow. A little.
Rabbi, we'll be on vacation for 2 weeks, so we won't see you here.
Ooh, okay.
We'll see you on campus. So.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to remind everyone that if you have not yet, if you are participating in the community Seder, then please sign up promptly. If you are, I'm hosting a Jammies in Jeans Seder here, which is for preschool-aged kids and their families, and I run around and we put we dress up as slaves, and I part a sea for them, and I chase after them like I'm the Pharaoh with all this stuff. So it's a lot of fun. That's the second night of Passover, and I want to wish everyone a happy and healthy Passover. If you have to sell your chametz, please do it. You do it on the computer. Just go on our website, click Passover, and there's a form that you can just fill out real quick that'll send you. I'll be authorized to sell your chametz, and I'll do a good job. Okay, so have a happy and healthy Pesach, everybody, and God willing, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Okay, bye-bye. You can. Why don't you keep these and bring them to your Passover Seder?
That's what I think. The seating, it reminds me in the military.
Oh, yeah.
If there was a master dinner. So the general was in the center, and the guest of honor general was next to him. And the wife of the guest of honor sat next to this general. The wife of the general of the place sat next to the other general, and then this colonel and his wife, and then this colonel and his wife, and way at the end, Marv and me.
See who it's at the other end?
We were the last
Blowing each
one
other-
on either
blowing each other
end.
kisses.
Yeah, I mean, because for some reason in protocol, in non-Jewish settings, husbands and wives don't sit together. And they always were surprised when we would invite them to the Passover Seder, the community Seder. They came, they were always surprised that they were sitting with their wives.
There's something that was good.
Yeah, right. But it was just so funny because Marv was low colonel on the totem pole as chaplain.
But then you got an aisle seat.
But then, yeah.
But then you rather
But
get
this is the dais, the head table. But you can't cut out early.
That's right. When you're in the rabbi one of these dinners and they say, "Hey, do you want to leave your cut on the zone?" You're like, "Oh gosh, you're there the whole night." That's great.
So if we put the mug under Rabbi Gamaliel, does that mean he's the awesome one?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I just understand that.
Have a great day. Oh, it's great. I like your joke.
I'm sorry, I should have
You
said that.
apologize. It's funny. It's okay. Everything is good?
I can't hear her, but everything's good.
All right. Well, I didn't say anything worthwhile. Let's just listen to her.
Are you going to come Monday mornings?
Oh, on Monday before Pesach.
No, this coming 15th. We have, it's my father's roadside.
Oh, yeah. I don't think so.
Okay. It's roughly just like a You're not here?
But I wish you good memories. All right, sir. All right. Thank you.
What you say you don't think so?
Always more than meets the eye. That's a very good. That's a truism. Chag Sameach. Chag Sameach. Go to your feet.
Will we get back here in May?
could we pick up